Good evening. It's kind of you to return. I have a bedtime story for you. There are, it would appear, certain wholly unremarkable persons with none of the characteristics that invite adventure, who yet once or twice in the course of their smooth lives undergo an experience so strange that the world catches its breath. Dull, ordinary folk have no right to out-of-the-way experiences, yet there could be no question that something did actually happen to little Arthur Vezin. He was on his way home when it happened, crossing northern France, and the train was jammed to suffocation, most of the passengers being unredeemed holiday English. And when the train stopped for 10 panting minutes at the little station, and he got out to stretch his legs on the platform, the idea of staying a night in this little town and going on next day by a slower, emptier train flashed into his mind. And for once, he acted with decision and rushed to snatch his bag. Then, of course, the train rushed off and left Vezin standing on the platform alone and rather forlorn. The little town climbed in straggling fashion up a sharp hill, rising out of the plain at the back of the station, and was crowned by the twin towers of the ruined cathedral peeping over the summit. He walked softly, almost on tiptoe, down the winding narrow streets where the gables all but met over his head, and he entered the doorway of the solitary inn with a deprecating and modest demeanour that was in itself an apology for intruding upon the place and disturbing its dream. And coming downstairs for a little promenade in the town before dinner, he encountered the proprietress. She was a large woman, whose hands, feet, and features seemed to swim towards him out of vivacious eyes that counteracted the bulk of her body, and betrayed the fact that in reality she was both vigorous and alert. When he first caught sight of her, she was knitting in a low chair against the sunlight of the wall. Something at once made him see her as a great tabby cat, dozing, yet awake, heavily sleepy, and yet at the same time prepared for instantaneous action. A great mouser on the watch occurred to him. About the streets of that little town he meandered gently, falling deeper and deeper into the spirit of repose that characterized it. The September sunshine fell slantingly over the roofs. Down winding alleys, fringed with tumbling gables and open casements, he caught fairy-like glimpses of the great plain below, and of the meadows and yellow copses lying like a dream map in the haze. The spell of the past held very potently here, he felt. No one took any notice of him, or turned to stare at his obviously English appearance. He was in a shop when it came to him first. He was buying socks and struggling with his dreadful French, when it struck him that the woman in the shop did not care 2 pins whether he bought anything or not. She was indifferent whether she made a sale or did not make a sale. She was only pretending to sell. For the whole town, he suddenly realized, was something other than he so far saw it. The real activities and interests of the people were elsewhere and otherwise than appeared. Vezin stayed on from day to day, indefinitely, much longer than he had intended. He felt in a kind of dazed, somnolent condition, and it became clear to him every day that he was never free himself from observation. The town watched him as a cat watches a mouse. It was on the 5th day that he made a definite discovery. It was dusk, and the oil lamps had not yet been lit in the passages. Halfway down the last passage to his own chamber there was a sharp turn, and it was just here, while groping round the walls with outstretched hands, that his fingers touched something that was not wall, something that moved. It was soft and warm in texture, indescribably fragrant, and about the height of his shoulder, and he immediately thought of a furry, sweet-smelling kitten. The next minute he knew it was something quite different. Vezin almost ran down the remaining distance and entered his room with a rush, locking the door hurriedly behind him. Yet it was not fear that made him run. It was excitement, pleasurable excitement. Warm currents of life ran all over him and mounted to his brain in a whirl of soft delight. When a knock came at length upon his door, and he heard the waiter's voice suggesting that dinner was nearly over, he pulled himself together and slowly made his way downstairs into the dining-room. He took his customary seat in the far corner and began to eat. Then he became aware that the other guests were rising one by one in their places, and exchanging greetings with someone who passed among them. And when at length he turned, with his heart beating furiously, he saw the form of a young girl, lithe and slim, moving down the centre of the room and making straight for his own table in the corner. She was addressing him. He was aware that she greeted him with a charming little bow, that her beautiful large eyes looked searchingly into his own, that the perfume he'd noticed in the dark passage again assailed his nostrils. She was quite close to him. That was the chief thing he knew, explaining that she'd been asking after the comfort of her mother's guests and was now introducing herself to the latest arrival, himself. Vezin half rose to acknowledge the pretty speech and to stammer some sort of reply, but as he did so his hand by chance touched her own that was resting upon the table, and a shock, that was for all the world like a shock of electricity, passed from her skin into his body. He caught her eyes fixed upon his own with a look of most curious intentness, and the next moment he knew that he had sat down wordless again in his chair, that the girl was already halfway across the room, and that he was trying to eat his salad with a dessert spoon and a knife. Their intimacy grew very rapidly after this first encounter. The girl was always modestly behaved, and as her mother's representative she naturally had to do with the guests in the hotel. Besides, she was young, she was charmingly pretty, she was French, and she obviously liked him. Conversations with Mademoiselle Ilse became more and more frequent and pleasant. They went over the town together, and she showed him the sombre, aristocratic-looking mansion where her mother's family dwelt for centuries, and the ancient marketplace where several hundred years before the witches had been burnt by the score. Only one curious incident came to disturb and puzzle him, slight in itself, but utterly inexplicable. He had merely pointed to a column of blue smoke that rose from the burning autumn leaves, and had then called her to his side to watch the flames shooting here and there through the heap of rubbish. Yet, at the sight of it, as though taken by surprise, her face had altered dreadfully, and she turned and run like the wind, calling out wild sentences to him as she ran, of which he did not understand a single word, except that the fire apparently frightened her, and she wanted to get quickly away from it, and to get him away too. Yet 5 minutes later she was as calm and happy again as though nothing had happened to alarm or waken troubled thoughts in her, and they had both forgotten the incident. They were leaning over the ruined ramparts together. No one was about. Driven by some remorseless engine within, he began to stammer something, he hardly knew what, of his strange admiration for her. "Oh, I'm so glad," she said, clapping her hands softly in his face. "So very glad, because that means if you like me, you must also like what I belong to. You will take part in our real life, I mean," she added softly, with an indescribable coaxing of manner, as though she noticed his shrinking. "You will come back to us. I possess the spell to conquer you and hold you. I mean to have you, for you love me and are utterly at my mercy. You had to come, for I own you, and I claim you." At this, little Vezin utterly lost his head. Delight tore at his heart and swept him into sheer ecstasy. To hear that sweet singing voice and see those adorable little lips utter such things upset his balance beyond all hope of control. He took her in his arms and covered her unresisting face with kisses. But even while he did so, and while the hot passion swept him, he felt that she was soft and loathsome, and that her answering kisses stained his very soul. And when presently she'd freed herself and vanished into the darkness, he stood there, leaning against the wall in a state of collapse, creeping with horror from the touch of her yielding body, and inwardly raging at the weakness that he already dimly realized must prove his undoing. And from the shadows of the old buildings into which she disappeared, there rose in the stillness of the night a singular, long-drawn cry, which at first he took for laughter, but which later he was sure he recognized as the almost human wailing of a cat. For a long time Vezin leant there against the wall, alone with his surging thoughts and emotions, The moon, pale and enormous, was just rising over the sea-like plain when at last he rose to go. Nervously, he peered about him. He knew a pathway descended to the high road, along which he could make good his escape to one of the other little towns that lay to the northward, and so to the railway. But first he paused and gazed out over the scene at his feet, where the great plain lay, like a silver map of some dream country. The breath caught in his throat, and he stood stock-still as though transfixed when his gaze fell upon the near prospect in the depth of the valley at his feet. The whole lower slopes of the hill were aglow, and through the glare he saw countless moving forms, shifting thick and fast between the openings of the trees, while overhead he discerned flying shapes that hovered darkly one moment against the sky, and then settled down with cries and weird singing through the branches into the region that was aflame. But in that very instant, as he stood hovering, a sudden movement among the shadows of the houses caught his eye, and he turned to see the outline of a large animal dart swiftly across the open space behind him, and land with a flying leap upon the top of the wall a little lower down. It ran like the wind to his feet, and then rose up beside him upon the ramparts. A shiver seemed to run through the moonlight, and his sight trembled for a second. His heart pulsed fearfully. Ilse stood beside him, peering into his face. "See," she cried, pointing with an arm in which the rags fluttered in the rising wind toward the forest to glow in the distance. "See, well, they are with us. The woods are alive. Already the great ones are there, and the dance will soon begin. The salve is here. Anoint yourself, and come." Her hands touched the skin of his face and neck, streaking him with the burning salve that sent the old magic into his blood with the power before which fades all that is good. Just saving himself from the dreadful plunge, Vezin struggled to release himself from her grasp, while the passion tore at his reins and all but mastered him. The crying of hoarse voices smote upon his ears, coming closer. Ilse clung to him with her long, shining arms, smooth and bare, holding him fast about the neck. But not Ilse alone, for a dozen of them surrounded him, dropping out of the air. He caught his foot upon a loose stone in the edge of the wall, and then fell with a sudden crash onto the ground below. And they, too, came in a tumbling heap about him, like flies upon a piece of food. But as they fell, he was released for a moment from the power of their touch, and in that brief instant of freedom there flashed into his mind the sudden intuition that saved him. Quick as a flash, he found his matches and lit the dead leaves that lay under the wall. Dry and withered, they caught fire at once, and the wind carried the flame in a long line down the length of the wall, licking upwards as it ran. And with shrieks and wailings, the crowded row of forms upon the top melted away into the air on the other side, and were gone, with a great rush and whirring of their bodies down into the heart of the haunted valley, leaving Vezin breathless and shaken in the middle of the deserted ground. With one last shuddering look at the ruined ramparts, and a feeling of horrid wonder for the haunted valley beyond, he turned his face away from the town, and slowly made his way in the direction of the railway. Well, I expect you're ready for your rest now. I hope it will be undisturbed. welcome again. Alas, for the last time. And one final story. Hibbert, always conscious of two worlds, was, in this particular mountain village, conscious of three. It lay on the slopes of the Valley Alps, and he'd taken a room in the little post office where he could be at peace to write his book. The three worlds that met and mingled here seemed to his imaginative temperament very obvious. There was the world of tourist English, civilized, quasi-educated, to which he belonged by birth, at any rate. There was the world of peasants, to which he felt himself drawn by sympathy. And there was this other, which he could only call the world of nature. To this last, however, he felt that most of him belonged. The others borrowed from it, as it were, for visits. Here, with the soul of nature, hid his central life. "Don't go back to your dreary old post office. We're going to have supper in my room, something hot. Come and join us. Hurry up." There'd been an ice carnival, and the last party, tailing up the snow slope to the hotel, called him. Quite suddenly, the impulse came to stay and skate alone. The thought of the stuffy hotel room and of those noisy people with their obvious jokes and laughter oppressed him. He felt a longing to be alone with the night, to taste her wonder all by himself, there beneath the stars, gliding over the ice. There was a queer feeling that he stayed because he had to, almost as though there was something he'd forgotten, overlooked, left undone. He skated on and on, keen, exhilarating pleasure in his tingling blood, and weariness all forgotten. And then, midway in the delight of rushing movement, he saw a figure gliding behind the wire netting, watching him. She was tall and slim and graceful. He could see that even in the dark. And then, of course, he understood. It was another adventurous skater like himself, stolen down unawares from hotel or chalet and searching for the opening. He turned to see her swerving up to his side across the width of the rink. She had somehow found another way in. She was delicious to skate with, supple, sure, and light, fast as a man, yet with the freedom of a child, sinuous and steady at the same time. Her flexibility made him wonder, and when he asked where she'd learned, she murmured. He caught the breath against his ear and recalled later that it was singularly cold, that she could hardly tell, for she had been accustomed to the ice ever since she could remember. But her face he never properly saw. Midnight had long since sounded from the old church tower before they parted. He saw her slim figure gliding away across the snow. Very queer, he thought, and wondering what in the world had possessed him to be so free with her, and who in the world she was, he went up the steep slope to the post office, and so to bed, her promise to come again another night still ringing delightfully in his ears. In the morning, Hibbert realized he had done perhaps a foolish thing. Gossip in these little winter resorts was worse than in a provincial town. In his times of leisure, the memory returned persistently to haunt him. When he skied or danced in the evenings, and especially when he skated on the little rink, he was aware that the eyes of his mind forever sought this strange companion of the night. He searched in vain. For several days the sky held clear and bright and frosty, bitterly cold, everything crisp and sparkling in the sun. But there was no sign of fresh snow, and the skiers began to grumble. The keen east wind showed no signs of changing for a whole 10 days. Then suddenly there came a touch of softer air. Hibbert, who was delicately sensitive to the least change in earth or sky, was perhaps the first to feel it. He knew through every nerve in his body that presently a fall would come. That night there was excitement in the little hotel world, first because there was a bal costume, but chiefly because the new snow had come. And snow that night seemed in everybody's thoughts. The dancing couples talked of it. The hotel proprietors congratulated one another. It meant good sport and satisfied their guests. Everyone was planning trips and expeditions, talking of slopes and tide marks, of flying speed and distance, of drifts and crust and frost. But in the mind of Hibbert, this energy became transmuted into the personality of the girl of the snow. She somewhere was waiting for him, expecting him, calling to him softly from those leagues of moonlit mountain. But nowhere among the costumed dancers did he see her slender figure. It was close on midnight. Lighting a cigarette a friend offered him, Hibbert returned a confused reply to some question as to whether he could join their party in the morning. It seemed he did not hear it properly. Another wilder call was sounding in his ears. For up the street he had seen a little figure moving. Close against the shadows of the baker's shop it glided, white, slim, enticing. He knew by some incalculable swift instinct she would not meet him in the village street. Indeed, already she had disappeared, melted from view up the white vista of the moonlit road. Hibbert found himself beyond the houses, searching for her along the fringe of forest. But he was aware of a faint sense of hesitation, a vague uneasiness, jarred unpleasantly across the flow of his excited feelings, chilling exhilaration. He caught the instant's discord, dismissed it, and passed on. And then he saw her. She stood there waiting in a little clear space of shining snow, dressed all in white, part of the moonlight and the glistening background, her slender figure just discernible. "I waited, for I knew you would come." The silvery little voice of windy beauty floated down to him. "You had to come." "I'm ready," he answered. I knew it, too." Life leapt within him. "Give me your hand," he cried. "I'm coming." And soon they left the trees behind and passed on to the enormous slopes of the sea of snow that rolled in mountainous terror and beauty to the stars. The wonder of the white world caught him away. Under the steady moonlight it was more than haunting. It was a living, white, bewildering power that deliciously confused the senses and laid a spell of wild perplexity upon the heart. The girl, slim and seductive, kept always just ahead, so that he never quite came up with her. He saw the white enchantment of her face and figure, something that streamed about her neck, flying like a wreath of snow in the wind, and heard the alluring accents of her whispering voice that called from time to time, "A little farther on, a little higher, then we'll run home together." They took a gentle angle of ascent. In this crystal, wine-like air, fatigue vanished. The swishing of the ski through the powdery surface of the snow was the only sound that broke the stillness. "Give me your hand. It's time now to turn back." "Just one more slope," she laughed. "That ridge above us, then we'll make for home." "But I've never come so high before. Oh, it's glorious, this world of silent snow and moonlight. You're a child of the snow, I swear. Let me see your face." He stopped. The girl had suddenly come quite close. A breath of ice passed through his very soul. She touched him. The sound of the church bell came up faintly from the valley far below, and he counted the strokes. 5. A sudden, curious weakness seized him as he listened. He felt like sinking down upon the snow and lying there. He'd been climbing for 5 hours. It was, of course, the warning of complete exhaustion. "A little higher, where we cannot hear the wicked bells," she cried, and for the first time seized him deliberately by the hand. She moved, was suddenly close against his face. Again she touched him. And Hibbert tried to turn away and escape, and so trying found for the first time the power of the snow, the suffocating weakness that it brings to exhausted men, luring them to the sleep of death in her clinging, soft embrace. Her arms were round his neck. She drew him softly downwards to his knees. He sank. He yielded utterly. He obeyed. Her weight was upon him, smothering, delicious. The snow was to his waist. She kissed him softly on the lips, the eyes, all over his face. He made one more feeble effort to resist. Then, realizing even while he struggled that this soft weight about his heart was sweeter than anything life could ever bring, he let his muscles relax and sank back into the soft oblivion of the covering snow. Her wintry kisses bore him into sleep. Hibbert woke. He slowly turned, bewildered, heavy eyes upon the desolate mountains, stared dizzily about him, tried to rise. First his muscles would not act. A numbing, aching pain possessed him. He uttered a long, thin cry for help, and heard its faintness swallowed by the wind. And then he understood vaguely why he was only warm, not dead. For the wind had built up a sheltering mound of driven snow against his body while he slept. Dawn kissed the eastern sky. He saw the points of his skis projecting just below him. Then he remembered, could he but rise, the skis would carry him. But if he failed and fell... He rose slowly, balanced a moment, then, taking the angle of an immense zigzag, started down the awful slopes like an arrow from a bow. He took it in 4 mile-long zigzags, and it was the turning at each corner that nearly finished him, for then the strain of balancing taxed to the verge of collapse the remnants of his strength. And ever close upon his heels came following forms and voices with the whirling snow-dust. He heard that little silvery voice of death and laughter at his back, but in anger now, no longer soft and coaxing. And it was accompanied. She did not follow alone. It seemed a host of these flying figures of the snow chased madly just behind him. He felt them furiously smite his neck and cheeks, snatch at his hands, and try to entangle his feet and skis in drifts. His eyes they blinded, and they caught his breath away. The terror of the heights and snow and winter desolation urged him forward, in the maddest race with death a human being ever knew. There was one last wild cry in his ears, a shriek of the wind before his face, and a rush of stinging snow against closed eyelids, and then he dropped through empty space. Speed took sight from him. It seemed he flew off the surface of the world. Indistinctly, he recalls the murmur of men's voices, the touch of strong arms that lifted him, and the shooting pain from his twisted ankle. For when he opened his eyes again to normal life, he found himself lying in his bed, with the doctor at his side. For years to come, the story of Mad Hibbert skiing at night is recounted in that mountain village. He went, it seems, up slopes and to a height that no man in his senses ever tried before. The tourists were agog about it for the rest of the season, and the very same day 2 of the bolder men went up and photographed the slopes. Later, Hibbert saw these photographs. He noticed one curious thing about them, though he did not mention it to anyone. There was only one single track. Well, I must take my leave. Who knows if we will meet again? I hope we do. But, till then, sleep well. Good evening. I trust you've had an agreeable day and are now safely tucked up in bed. I have a tale for you. After leaving Vienna, the Danube enters a region of singular loneliness and desolation, where its waters spread away on all sides, regardless of a main channel, and the country becomes a swamp for miles upon miles, covered by a vast sea of low willow bushes. The Swede and I, in our Canadian canoe, with gypsy tent and frying pan on board, reached it on the crest of a rising flood about mid-July. We entered the land of desolation on wings, and in less than half an hour there was neither boat nor fishing hut nor red roof nor any single sign of human habitation and civilization within sight. The island I found was less than an acre in extent, a mere sandy bank standing some 2 or 3 feet above the level of the river. Altogether it was an impressive scene, with its utter loneliness, its bizarre suggestion, and as I gazed long and curiously, a singular emotion began to stir somewhere in the depths of me. Midway in my delight of the wild beauty, there crept, unbidden and unexplained, a curious feeling of disquietude, almost of alarm. Great revelations of nature, of course, never fail to impress in one way or another, and I was no stranger to moods of the kind. With this multitude of willows, however, it was something far different. Some essence emanated from them that besieged the heart. A sense of awe awakened, true, but of awe touched somewhere by a vague terror. Their serried ranks, growing everywhere darker about me as the shadows deepened, moving furiously yet softly in the wind, woke in me the curious and unwelcome suggestion that we had trespassed here upon the borders of an alien world. There was a slight depression in the centre of the island, and here we pitched the tent. The surrounding willows broke the wind a bit. Everything was snug for the night, the canoe lying turned over beside the tent. We smothered the embers of the fire with sand, and then turned in. It was neither the wind nor the river that woke me, but the slow approach of something that caused the sleeping portion of me to grow smaller and smaller, till at last it vanished altogether, and I found myself sitting bolt upright, listening. I sat there nervously, wide awake, as though I had not slept at all. Then suddenly the explanation leapt into my mind. A bough had fallen with the wind. Still half caught by the other branches, its leaves brushed and tapped upon the tight canvas surface of the tent. But when I got out and stood upright, I saw that the tent was free. There was no hanging bough. There was no rain or spray. Nothing approached. A dreadful discovery leapt out at me. For a change, I thought, had somehow come about in the arrangement of the landscape. It was not that my point of vantage gave me a different view, but that an alteration had apparently been effected in the relation of the tent to the willows. Surely the bushes now crowded much closer, unnecessarily, unpleasantly close. They had moved nearer. I crawled stealthily into my blankets. My companion, to all appearances, still slept soundly, and I was glad that this was so. Provided my experiences were not corroborated, I could find strength somehow to deny them, perhaps. The sun was high in the heavens when my companion woke me from a heavy sleep and announced that the porridge was cooked and there was just time to bathe. The grateful smell of frizzling bacon entered the tent door. "River still rising?" he said. "We shall be fortunate if we get away without further disaster." "Further disaster? Why? What's happened?" "For one thing, the steering paddle's gone," he said quietly. "The steering paddle gone?" I repeated, greatly excited, for this was our rudder, and the Danube in flood without a rudder was suicide. "But what—" "And there's a tear in the bottom of the canoe," he added, with a genuine little tremor in his voice. I approached to see. There was a long, finely made tear in the bottom of the canoe. I made a hurried examination of the tent and its surroundings. There were deep hollows formed in the sand, I now noticed for the first time, basin-shaped, and of various depths and sizes, varying from that of a teacup to a large bowl. I had once set the pitch melting, and presently the Swede joined me at the work, though the canoe could not be safe for travelling till the following day. I drew his attention casually to the hollows in the sand. "Yes," he said, "I know. They're all over the island, but you can explain them, no doubt." "Wind, of course," I answered without hesitation. We worked on in silence for a bit. That afternoon, while the canoe dried and hardened, we spent trying to fish, testing the leak, collecting wood. From 5 o'clock onwards I busied myself with the stew pot and preparations for dinner, it being my turn to cook that night. The pot had just begun to bubble when I heard his voice calling to me from the bank. I ran up. "Come and listen," he said. A sound began to reach my ears, faintly, a peculiar sound. It seemed to come across to us in the darkness from the waste of swamps and willows opposite. I can liken it to nothing so much as to the sound of an immense gong, suspended far up in the sky, repeating incessantly its muffled metallic note, soft and musical, as it was repeatedly struck. My heart quickened as I listened. "The wind blowing in those sand funnels," I said, determined to find an explanation. "Or the bushes rubbing together after the storm, perhaps." Our meal was beyond question a gloomy one, and we ate it almost in silence, avoiding one another's eyes and keeping the fire bright. The curious sound became now almost incessant, and filled the stillness of the night with a faint continuous ringing, rather than a series of distinct notes. We sat smoking in comparative silence, the strain growing every minute greater. "There are things about us, I'm sure, that make for disorder, disintegration, destruction, our destruction," the Swede said once while the fire blazed between us. "We've strayed out of a safe line somewhere. There are forces close here that could kill a herd of elephants in a second, as easily as you or I could squash a fly. Our only chance is to keep perfectly still. Our insignificance may perhaps save us. I think they feel us, but cannot actually see us. We must keep our minds quiet. It's our minds they feel. We must control our thoughts, or it's all up with us. We must keep them out of our minds at all costs, if possible. Above all, don't think, for what you think happens." "We'll make one more blaze," I said firmly, "and then turn in for the night. At sunrise we'll be off full speed. Now, pull yourself together a bit and remember your own advice about not thinking fear." We were grubbing away in the middle of a thickish clump of willows where some driftwood from a former flood had caught high among the branches, when my body was seized in a grip that made me half drop upon the sand. It was the Swede. He'd fallen against me and was clutching me for support. I heard his breath coming and going in short gasps. "Look, by my soul," he whispered. And for the first time in my experience, I knew what it was to hear tears of terror in a human voice. He was pointing to the fire some 50 feet away. There, in front of the dim glow, something was moving. It was neither a human figure nor an animal. To me it gave the strange impression of being as large as several animals grouped together, like horses, 2 or 3, moving slowly. "I watched it settle downwards through the bushes," he sobbed at me. "Oh, look, my God, he's coming this way. Oh, oh." He gave a kind of whistling cry. "Oh, they found us." I gave one terrified glance, which just enabled me to see that the shadowy form was swinging towards us through the bushes, and then I collapsed backwards with a crash into the branches. My eyes were tightly shut. Something in my throat choked me. A feeling that my consciousness was expanding, extending out into space, swiftly gave way to another feeling that I was losing it altogether and about to die. An acute spasm of pain passed through me, and I was aware that the Swede had hold of me in such a way that he hurt me abominably. It was the way he caught at me in falling. But it was this pain, he declared afterwards, that saved me. It caused me to forget them and think of something else at the very instant when they were about to find me. He himself, he says, actually swooned at the same moment, and that was what saved him. "I lost consciousness for a moment or two," I heard him say. "You nearly broke my arm in two," I said, uttering my only connected thought at the moment. A numbness came over me. "That's what saved you?" he replied. "Between us, we've managed to set them off on a false tack somewhere. The humming has ceased. It's gone, for the moment at any rate." We made our way back to the fire and put the wood on so that it blazed at once. Then we saw that the tent had fallen over and lay in a tangled heap upon the ground. We picked it up, and during the process tripped more than once and caught our feet in sand. "It's those sand funnels," exclaimed the Swede, "and look at the size of them." All round the tent and about the fireplace, where we'd seen the moving shadows, there were deep, funnel-shaped hollows in the sand, exactly similar to the ones we'd already found over the island, only far bigger and deeper, beautifully formed. Neither of us said a word. We both knew that sleep was the safest thing we could do, and to bed we went accordingly without further delay. When the sun was already high in a windless, hot sky, he at once got up and set about the preparation of the fire for breakfast. "The hunting has stopped," I said. "Everything has stopped," he said, because they've found another victim." "Huh?" I said, forcing a little laugh. "Exactly," he answered. "Come," he said. "I think if we look we shall find it." I followed him. "Look!" he exclaimed presently. He was pointing with his stick at a large black object that lay half in the water and half on the sand. "See," he said quietly, "the victim that made our escape possible." His stick rested on the body of a man. He turned it over. It was the corpse of a peasant, and the face was hidden in the sand. Clearly the man had been drowned but a few hours before. "We must give it a decent burial, you know." "I suppose so," I replied. The Swede started to turn it, then abruptly dropped upon his knees on the sand and covered his eyes with his hands. I saw what he had seen, how the skin and flesh were indented with small hollows, beautifully formed, and exactly similar in shape and kind to the sand funnels that we'd found all over the island. When I turned my eyes again from his ghastly face to the river, the current had done its work, and the body had been swept away into midstream and was already beyond our reach. We shall meet again tomorrow night.